If you've watched this channel for a while now, you'll know that when it comes to street photography, I can be a little bit of a wimp personally. I'm not a very confrontational person, and you could argue, I suppose, that the style of street photography I've chosen for myself has been as much about the aesthetics as it has been about avoiding those more confrontational styles of photography. I was down in London recently to film the video with Agenda Brown, which you might have already seen here on this channel. And I was staying with my friend Joshua Jackson, and we were up late one night talking about street photography as we usually do, and I was saying how I still struggled with those fears and I still avoided confrontation, and it changed the way that I took photographs, and I didn't like that I still had to battle that stuff. And let me say that Joshua is honestly one of the best street photographers I know. He's so methodical and careful and takes such a long view of things, and in so many ways he's much further down the road of street photography than I am. So when he gives advice, I really listen. I was surprised to hear him admit that he's battled a lot of those fears for himself, but he says two things have really helped him to overcome those fears for himself. One is body language, and the other is intention. And I thought the advice that he gave me was so good, I asked him if he'd be kind enough to sit down the next morning, let me set up a couple of cameras and capture that advice so that I could share it with all of you. He very kindly agreed, and so the next morning we filmed this video. So I'm going to shut up now and let you hear some great advice about overcoming your fears around street photography from my friend Joshua K. Jackson.
When I first started street photography, it was something that was completely out of my comfort zone. I'd never done it before, and I remember physically kind of almost like shaking, because it was like, oh, what if I get caught? You know, what are people going to say to me? To deal with that fear and anxiety and lack of confidence, I thought at that stage shooting from the hip would be a way to overcome that. But deep down, it felt wrong to me in a way, because I knew that I was obscuring or deliberately trying to conceal what I was doing, and that didn't feel right to me. I didn't really feel like I was taking complete ownership of the composition. You know, it felt a little bit kind of chancing in a way. In street photography, moments are so scarce, like good moments to photograph. You kind of really want to make the most of it when you see it. The reality is you're never going to be invisible, but what you can do is take steps to not draw attention to yourself, having a relaxed demeanor, not walking around with a camera kind of signaling that you're about to take images of people, so kind of arriving at the scene kind of with the camera by your side, having a relaxed facial expression even. And I find that if you keep moving within a specific area, Joel Meyerowitz uses the phrase bruising the scene. And one of the things that I learned early on was kind of hanging around or just standing in one particular spot for an extended period of time would invariably kind of draw attention to the photographer. My approach now is to kind of just kind of keep moving through the city, and that could be in just a tiny little area and just kind of doing laps. So if we take the example of, say, Piccadilly Circus, I'll arrive at Piccadilly Circus, and what I'll do is I'll do a perimeter walk. So I'll just keep walking around the outside, and then I'll gradually kind of circle in, and then I'll keep going back out again. And I'm just always on the move, you know, checking things from different vantage points. And I think when you plant yourself in one particular spot, you draw attention to yourself, and people become a lot more aware of something that's static within a city than something that's moving. And one thing you'll find that every time you do a lap around that area, it will change. You know, the life will present a new opportunity every time you come round, and whether that will lead to good photos or not is another matter. But every situation, you'll come across a whole new set of situations and scenarios every time you go around the block. And quite often you'll get really emotionally invested in the idea of one image. And one thing that I found is that sometimes you'll look around and see something better than maybe what was the original intention of the photograph. When it comes to body language, of course, I'm by no means an expert in body language, but as a self-taught photographer, I feel like I've made every mistake there is to make. Even on a daily basis, I make mistakes. And one thing I learned early on is you can express open body language and you can express closed body language. And the latter tends to be received in more of a negative sense. So if I'm walking around, I'm trying to have open body language, embracing the world in a kind of metaphorical sense. Whereas closed body language is things like hands in pockets. It looks like you're trying to almost hide something or conceal your intent. And to some people that suggests concealment about what you're doing, or nervousness, and that in turn, that nervousness can make other people feel uncomfortable by your presence. Or one of the things when I've done kind of workshops in the past is I've noticed that because it's an uncomfortable experience, particularly if you're new to street photography, and it's certainly something I felt, I kind of found myself with the kind of free hand kind of putting it in my pocket or in my jacket or whatever. And again, it's quite closed body language. And in Chinatown in London, there's a stall that's there every day that kind of gives out leaflets. And one thing that we have done is we've kind of grabbed something in our left hand, if you're right-handed, and just kind of got them to just kind of walk down the street with that kind of leaflet in their hand. And it's helped them kind of stay open body language, because the camera's in this arm and then they've got this hand free. And again, it's avoiding that kind of closed body language. So I found that's quite a useful kind of thing to do. So if you find yourself kind of putting your hand in your pocket and kind of all closed up and trying to conceal what you're doing, just opening up. And people are quite perceptive, and if you are intense and focused or nervous, people really pick up on that. And I find that when you're in a relaxed and positive mindset, things just flow a lot better as well. You don't put yourself under such stress to kind of make images, and things just seem to happen, and you see more when you're in that kind of mindset. So it's just a case of kind of relaxing your facial expression, and sometimes you need to kind of consciously switch out of the kind of the default mode and go into a kind of happy place. And sometimes I'll even assume the role of like a tourist. You see tourists walking around. So, for example, I don't live too far from Buckingham Palace. There's lots of photographers there with huge cameras, and they're no threat whatsoever, because you know they're a tourist and their intentions are just to make kind of nice photos of London or whatever. So I like to almost try and play that role sometimes, and look at what they're doing and how relaxed they are, because they know that they're just photographing, to make some memories to share with family and friends. And in a way, I like to think that I'm doing that with street photography. I'm just trying to make memories for myself and maybe for those around us of our time. And I guess in a way, given what's happened over the last couple of years, it feels particularly important to photograph life, because on the surface things have changed a great deal. I like to think of street photography almost like kind of photojournalism of everyday life, and having that kind of relaxed demeanor or mindset just helps you kind of get into those situations without causing concern or upset. And a lot of people, when they think of street photography, they think of kind of brash photography, in your face, flash. To me, that is a very small part of what street photography is. It's quite a broad genre, and there's lots of different approaches. And I suppose in a way I'm a bit more passive. So, I like to respect people's personal space and boundaries and not draw attention to myself, and try and go through the city kind of largely unnoticed. And it doesn't come down to gear. It doesn't matter about using a large camera or a small camera. your body language is what determines how people respond to you and the proximity that you can get to people, not the size of the camera that you're using. So if I have done workshops in the past, I've done a silly exercise where I've grabbed 2 cameras and held one in each hand and walked around and showed people it doesn't matter what you're using, you know, and as ridiculous as I looked, it was just to kind of emphasize the point that people won't notice you if they don't perceive that you are a threat to them or their personal space. So yeah, it's all about your body language that determines how close you can get and how people will respond and how comfortable you feel. I use the LCD screen a lot, and I find it quite a liberating way to photograph, and I'm still taking ownership of the composition and all of those things, so I'm not kind of photographing blindly. And I know a lot of photographers will kind of look down on people using LCD screens, but I got in the habit of using the LCD screen a lot because the first camera that I owned had a really small viewfinder, and as a glasses wearer I could never see the edges of the frame, so I just ended up using the LCD screen as a kind of way to compose, because obviously that is much bigger than the viewfinder. And what I learned was that people responded, well, they didn't notice or care as much. I think it comes down to it's less intimidating for people because they can see your face. It kind of helps you build trust with the scene, that your intent is not a negative one. Because if I'm doing this to someone, I think that's more intimidating than if I'm kind of doing this. You know, especially if you're kind of smiling and you've got a relaxed kind of facial expression. You know, it's quite a non-offensive way to photograph. So I really enjoy using the LCD screen, and you could almost imagine in a way, so if I was using a larger mirrorless camera, it may look like I'm filming a video. And there has been situations whereby I've kind of been photographing a scene or just kind of dialing in the exposure or the focus or whatever, and people have kind of gone sorry because they thought they've stepped in the middle of me doing a film clip or something. So yeah, I find it's quite cool using the LCD screen, and in a way I like to think of it like you're looking down on a twin lens reflex camera like a Rolleiflex. It's no different because you're still taking ownership of the composition and the exposure. Nothing's done blind, and it's something that works for me. And sometimes I find it's interesting to use the LCD screen as well because eye level is a very familiar viewpoint on the world, and sometimes changing the perspective can become a little bit more interesting in certain situations, whether that be above or below, and the LCD screen helps you kind of alter the perspective sometimes. If I was up to no good and doing photography with maybe bad intentions, for whatever that may be, my body language would probably express that in a way. And when you walk around the city, you see street photographers kind of like hiding behind walls with like telephoto lenses and stuff. And, you know, to anyone walking past, that looks really strange, and they'll kind of notice someone doing that. Whereas someone who's just walking down the street, smiling, relaxed, open body language, you're not giving off the vibe that you're a threat, and you're kind of demonstrating that, hey, you know, I'm just out to photograph life. One of the conversations I have most on the street when I kind of bump into other photographers is one around intent. And I feel that if you have good intent, you should not have anything to fear. It's not a conscious thought at the time, it's just a kind of gut feel, but there should be a reason for making the image. And if someone were to ever confront you, it should be quite easy to justify why the image was made, whether that be the way the light was falling on a particular wall, or a blend of colours in a scene coming together, of whatever maybe people wearing or the environment and subjects becoming one. I always know that there's a reason for making the image, and it's never a negative one. There's always a positive reason for making the photo. So I never really get worried about being confronted, because I'm very confident that my intent is not out to make people look bad or hurt people with my photographs. It's one that's kind of embracing life and trying to see things in a positive way. If you're enjoying the process, that kind of everything just kind of snowballs. So you're projecting the right body language. You'll be more optimistic about what you're going to see. You'll find that life is more generous with opportunities, and everything just kind of snowballs from there. Whereas if you're feeling nervous or scared or like you're doing something wrong, that will almost rob the enjoyment of making photographs. And we photograph because we enjoy the process, right?